Welcome to episode 1020 of The Sleeper and the Buzz. I am Justin Mason, joined as always on Sundays by Jason Collette. Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing well, much better than this awful weather outside. This sucks. So perfect day to do podcasting because there's nothing else to do outside. It is an inside day when it's 42 and raining. Just yeah.
Yeah, I can't really complain. It's 9 o'clock in the morning right now, and I'm in a t-shirt in my office. So California is treating me pretty good right now. Who else is treating us pretty good? Jenny Butler of Rotoballer is here. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is very exciting. I think I've made the big time.
You've made it, right?
I guess so.
Jenny, remind everybody where you can be reached on social media, and then talk a little bit about yourself because you've just entered the industry. You were a big-time NFBC player, kicking everybody's ass, right? And now you are joining the industry with your first article coming out soon.
Yeah. So on Twitter, I am at Jenny Butler 830. And then I started writing a little bit in this off season. Vlad Sedler asked me to help with the FTN 5-tool fantasy draft guide, and I did that. I wrote an article on roster construction, which I think went pretty well for my first, try at writing. So I was contacted after that by both Fantrax and Rotoballer. So I'm going to put together a little bit of content for them this season, I think. The first article that I've submitted to Rotoballer that's not out yet is on best ball strategy. So hopefully we can talk about that a little bit later.
I think we absolutely should, because we are going to be talking about speed mostly today, but we also have a few questions from Twitter, including a best ball question. So we'll let you take the reins on that one and kind of give your insight. I've done okay in the best balls. I'm not doing any cut lines this year, unfortunately, but it's a really fun format, especially if you don't have the time to necessarily worry about fab every week.
I've never done definitely. Either. I've never done cut line. I've never done best ball.
You don't do the RAS slam? Oh, okay.
No.
Cutline is great. I started out playing Cutline a lot, but there are 2 fab periods in that, and they can be a decent amount of work because there's one in like maybe the second week of the season and then one in June.
Yep.
And you really have to sort of get through all of the ads that you should be making when it's been 2 months since anybody's been added. So it can be, and you have to do a ton of conditionals. So it can be definitely some work on those 2 days, but it's still nice. Best ball format is really nice. Having your optimal lineup scored for you every week is really nice, not to have to think about which pitchers you want to start and things like that. So I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I like it a lot too, especially when I've got a million leagues. It's nice to be able to not have to do fab for all of them and set lineups for all of them each week. Because I had to cut so many leagues this year to win my bet with Rob Silver, which you were present for.
I am the official witness to that bet.
Yeah, that's right. You were standing right there when we made it, and I'm going to win this bet, Rob. I don't care how many times you tempt me with more leagues, but I had to drop all my best ball leagues in order to make sure I got my more important leagues kind of in. But let's talk about a need for speed. Jason, you released an article I guess this week on Friday over at RotoWire talking about it. Why don't you give kind of a rundown of what you went over before we get into the players we're going to discuss, and then I'll put a link to that article in the show notes, so that way people who are subscribing or want to go subscribe over at RotoWire can find that article.
Yeah, it's, by the way, there's like a 2-week free trial. Yeah, I think it's rotowire.com/try or free. I forget. Anyhow, it's free. There are, and if you check my Twitter feed, some of the images that I'm referring to are in there. So if you don't want to subscribe, start cheap, do it. But if you don't, you can check there. But basically, looking over stolen base attempts, the last few seasons, it has been something we've often talked about. Not everything's linear in baseball, but strikeout rates continue to go up, and the amount of closers where 30 plus saves goes down, and the amount of wins that are going to starting pitchers is going down. Well, so are steals. Steals have declined quite a bit, something like 35% attempts over the past decade. But the success rate is going up, so teams are being more judicious in when they're attempting those stolen bases. And so, a lot of the talk has been, there's been a lot of talk lately about Milestraw. Because Milestraw is like that guy outside the top 100. Like everybody seems to have an eye on, because like, okay, I ignored speed, or I didn't do enough speed. I've got to go get somebody. And like, he's the most obvious guy sitting right there outside the top 100, even though the rest of his game is rather flawed. But that's where it is. And so I'm trying to look at steals and use one of my own teams. We were talking about the different teams that we've done, and I picked 15th in the league and opened up with pocket aces, and then use that as to like, hey, what happened when I decided to let speed go and didn't take it? And then I believe my third round pick in that league was Lindor, and then how I just tried to do that, and then what it forced me to do in the reserves, because so much of the steals is concentrated inside that top 100. I have some graphics around it, just talking about where the pool is. We use the projected steals out there, and I was using RotoWires for the basis of this article. Over 36% of the projected steals are inside the top 100 by ADP over the past month. And that's where they tend to live. And then after that, you're looking at, like, if you're in a deeper league and you get to pick 400, you have 13% of the steals left in the pool. If you're fighting with another team like that, everybody's fighting for it. And it's just, the last piece I would say is just the number of players with 20 steals. 10 years ago, we had 50 players with that many steals. This past season, we had 19. We had more players with 20 steals in 2019. We had 21. Then it went to 19. It's gone 28. So that growth keeps going. That trend keeps going down. And that's even with Mondesi only playing a month each of the last 2 seasons, and he's still doing it, right? So it's becoming more and more scarce. And if you make the strategic decision to either focus on starting pitching, double tap closers, pocket aces, those types of things, these are the sacrifices you're making, and how you're going to have to try to build your team the rest of the way. And so I was looking at strategy, and did call out a few names of it, and showed some of the names I pursued within my own. But again, it's 10 is the new 20, 5 is the new 10. That's where the steals are, and you just kind of have to build your way through it.
Yeah. And what I did for today's rundown is I went to the ATC projections that are over on Fangraphs that Ariel Cohen does, and I sorted by stolen bases, and I pretty much put a list together of every single player that is projected by ATC to steal 20 bases. 16 players are expected to or projected to steal 20 bases. And only 5 of them go outside of the top 50 according to ADP. We're going to touch on them all. But Jenny, when we start with you in terms of what your stolen base strategy is when you head into a draft, do you just make sure you get a couple early guys, or are you going to spread the risk throughout the draft?
Yeah, I wish that I had some strategy that was not what everybody else is trying to do, but I don't know that there's a way to get around it. So, I'm doing, the same thing, trying to get them early. I don't generally like to wait on the later guys just because they hurt you in so many other categories. So, if you can get, one of those first round guys, that's great. But I do like to come out of the 4th round, 5th round, maybe with a couple of guys that will get me significant steals. And then I also, throughout the rest of the draft, try and get those chip-in steals wherever I can, the 6, 8, 10 stolen base type of guys. But at the same time, that has hurt me in the past because I tend to stay away from the big sluggers. I don't roster the Vlads and the Pete Alonsos and guys like that. And I've ended up in some leagues struggling with power. Later in the season or later in the draft. So it's definitely a balancing act.
Yeah, it's a balancing act that it can be very, very difficult to pay off. I'm the same way. I try to get at least 2 guys in my first 5 picks that I feel like are going to give me stolen bases. Every once in a while, I end up leaving those first 5 rounds without enough stolen bases, and I feel like I'm having to take real risk later on. I did a draft earlier this offseason. I always do one draft early in the offseason where I go, I'm going to take the best player available through the first 5 rounds. And I did this in a draft, and I went, man, look at this team through the first 6 rounds. I had Jack Flaherty as my number 3 starter. I had, and I went, I have like no stolen bases, like not nearly enough. And then I had to take shots on Milestraw and Nicky Lopez. And by the time I, finished the draft, I went, I hate this team. I absolutely hate this team. And I feel like I may have just lit my entry fee on fire. So I definitely want to try to give myself as many options as I can. And this is something Paul and I discussed in the last episode, is I don't want to limit my options. I don't want to limit the roads I can go down in a draft. And I feel like if I don't get enough speed early, then I'm limiting the options I've got later on.
Yeah, I think one thing, if I can sidebar slightly into John Legeza, counterpoint, is I feel like I hear so many people saying, when you're talking about catchers or saves or speed or third baseman, I just want to take the best player available. I want to take, I don't want to draft an early catcher because there are other guys, in that same round that are actually better players. And I get all that, but you're at any point during the draft, wherever you decide to take your catcher or your third baseman, probably everybody around them is a better player. It's not any different later than it was earlier. So, having a player that can set you apart in saves or steals or a catcher or at third base can really be helpful. And you are giving up something to do that. You're giving up, an overall slightly worse player at that point in the draft. But the difference that you're making compared to what you will be taking later, I think is worth it a lot of the time.
Yeah. Jason, what about you? What is your general stolen base strategy? I know you've got the article. People can go read kind of what you have been doing and what you kind of plan to do, but just give kind of a general overview.
I would say the biggest one is separating it. Let's talk auction first. An auction, I'm doing whatever I can to avoid having to draft a jackrabbit. Like, I don't want to get into this situation where I have to, like, I've got AL labor next coming up in 6 days or 5 days. And I've got AL tout following that. In both cases, I'll be very transparent. I don't want to get to the spot where I've got to overpay for Milestraw, because there's going to be somebody else in the auction that's going to have to do the same thing I am if I got to that point. So I don't want to get into that point. But if you look at the AL player pool and see what's out there, it gets, you take away, if you're not comfortable with the risk of Mondesi, and after what happened with me and Tout, which is an OBP league last year where I did take them, very hesitant to try to go back there again, but at the right price I would. You take off those the way it stands right now. I think there's gonna be a lot of us trying to build steals incrementally rather than try to do that. I figured draft like TGFBI and picking out of the 1-1 spot tomorrow. That's either going to be Turner or Ramirez, most likely Turner. But I've got that first pick. I may take the entire 4-hour clock as a power trip because I can do that and set the tone, because I know a lot of people are going to be slow playing picks anyhow, waiting for the news to break. Fingers crossed we get something here in the next 48 hours and things happen. But in all seriousness, that's, those are the only 2 guys I'm even considering for that 1-1 spot. And that really helps set the tone. So I can maybe take a chance on a more all-power guy, whereas because fingers crossed Turner could stay healthy or Ramirez can stay healthy, then I've got that foundation. So it really, when I go into it, I always want to build, but if the opportunity comes up early enough, I'll lean towards the guy with more speed than the guy with more power, because I know I can find the power later, and I'm always comfortable with my pitching. So speed, projected steals, or the skills, or where they are in the lineup, tends to be the tiebreaker. We talked a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was even last week when Lauren was on, when we talked about Cesar Hernandez, or maybe I heard her and Boba talking about it this week. But the fact that he just kind of stopped running, even though his athleticism and his skills still say he can run, he just hasn't been running. But if he's going to hit in front of Juan Soto, maybe he won't run anymore either, because again, if you open up first base with Juan Soto at the plate, he's going to end up on first base. We saw a bunch of that last year, where people are like, "Oh, hey, he had a high walk rate." Yeah, it's because nobody wanted to pitch to him. And if you give him the opportunity, you give teams the opportunity to pitch around him, that's exactly what they're going to do. So as somebody who has picked up Cesar Hernandez in all 3 leagues that I've completed so far, I'm really hoping he gets the leadoff spot. If I'm but I haven't targeted him for steals in this capacity. Because if he's hitting in front of Soto, I don't expect any more steals than he's had the last 2 seasons, which has been 1. If he can hit leadoff, maybe he's got some more in him. That's it.
All right. Please, for the love of God, do not take all 4 hours on your picks in the first round. And please, all of you who may be listening that are in TGFBI, enjoy tomorrow. Tomorrow's gonna be fantastic. It's gonna be crazy. People are gonna be having a blast. Please don't get auto drafted in the first round. Just please don't. You can set yourself on auto draft. Do not get auto drafted in the first round.
1-1. That'd be so awesome.
There's always one person that does it, and it's such a headache. Please don't do that. But if you would like to get into TGFBI, you still can for next season, right? So if you're not in the industry, you can win your way in via TGFBI satellite. Go to tgfbi.com. Those satellites are hosted over on Fantrax. So those of you who can't play on NFBC for whatever reason, you can play in the satellites on Fantrax. So go to tgfbi.com, click that button. There is my shameless plug right there for the day.
I played in the satellite leagues for
That's
2
right.
seasons. Yeah,
right?
It was good. I ended up finished second once. It was heartbreaking, but yeah, they're good. They're fun.
The stories I hear about people who, because I mean, for those who don't know, like you win a satellite league, you get in. You finish second, you finish 15th. Yeah. There's no difference. You don't get in. Yeah, you have to come back the next year. And the one of the cool things about being on Fantrax this year is that because I'm the commissioner of every league, I'm in like every league's chat in the chat room on Fantrax, and hearing the stories of people like, oh, I was winning until the last week of the season, and then this guy hit a home run, or this guy, got a save, and I fell out. And it just reminds you. I think anybody who plays poker knows this, but anybody who's been playing fantasy long enough is you remember those awful experiences in which you lost money, lost a league, way more than the ones where you went, hey, I won on the last day, all right, I still in my 2020 sprint main event, losing on, I think it was the second to last at bat of the season, Eugenio Suarez got a hit, and Dusty Wagner jumped over me and I didn't cash. So yeah, it was a $1,300 hit for Eugenio Suarez.
What was the year?
In my sprint main event, I went from first to fourth in the last week.
Yeah.
It's only 10 weeks. And only a 10-week season. You can't, it's just everything was still moving so much.
Yeah, I was in second place going into the last week of that, and with a shot to get to first. And I think the ultimate difference is I didn't start Robbie Grossman, and he stole like 3 bases in the last week of the season. And then on the last day, I didn't cash. So
I forget the year. I forget the year we had to go. We had the 2 extra play-in games, and there was somebody got thrown out at home, and I won the league because that runner got thrown out at home. Had he come in safe, the run category would have flipped. I would have lost by half a point.
That's crazy.
Yeah, there's one I can't remember what year it was, but Mark Grusolonic went 5 for 5 on the last day of the season. And guy jumped me in batting average, and I will never forgive Mark Grusolonic. So
you want to come tell him? You want to come tell him face to face? Grusonic's the manager here at the Charlotte Knights.
Oh God!
Come to town and be like, "Hey, Gruds,
if I ever meet him, I will tell him that story. I won't do it in a way where I'm a jerk or anything like that. I don't want to get knocked out by Mark Grusolonic, but that would be fun. And whenever I come to visit you in Charlotte, we'll go to the game. So let's jump in. And so I sorted it kind of by somewhat by ADP. It's not perfectly, but the first one are the high first rounders, right? Trey Turner, Jose Ramirez, Fernando Tatis, they're all in the conversation for the first overall pick in just about every league. Jason, you are picking first overall tomorrow. How do you kind of break it down with these guys?
In the order that you just listed them out. In all seriousness, I'm taking Turner tomorrow. It's already on auto pick. The only even reason I considered Ramirez, a couple of things. One, I already have him in 2 other leagues when I picked third. I do, but then again, I also like to diversify. I don't believe I've had Turner anywhere in recent years, anywhere. So it's like, the opportunity to have somebody that can do that. And if he does get hurt, and the other piece of that is that let's say something happens to Ramirez, I'm not knocked out of 4 leagues or 3 leagues right away with the same guy. So I think that a few people have taken this approach where they diversify their portfolio in the first third, and then the back half of it has a consistent theme. And when I looked at my current shares, most of my 100% shares players are all players that are in the very end game of reserve rounds. I don't have that consistency where I have the same guy in all 3 leagues in that first third of it. So, I mean, that's where I'm going with Turner because, again, it gives me the chance to do some things elsewhere. I do not want to double tap closers coming out of 2-3. Probably going to push that down and see where else I can, see what else I can do with that because I don't want to get caught up in this arms race for closers. It's going to change quickly here in short order, but people are doing what they're doing now because we don't know. So hopefully we'll see how that plays out. But for me, it's in that order, and I'm going to take it and see what happens.
What about you, Jenny? If you've got an early pick this year, who are you going with out of these 3?
Most likely Turner or Ramirez. I mean, Tatis, he's so hard to figure out. I mean, I am normally somebody who avoids, injury risks. And the fact that he did not get surgery on his shoulder really bothers me. But he's got such upside. I just don't think I can do it in a league where I'm paying a lot of money. So we'll see. But, there's always the concern that, his shoulder injury might prevent him from stealing as much. But he still stole last year. So I don't know if that's a realistic fear. So if I can get Turner Ramirez, I'm definitely going to do it. If you start getting into, 4, 5, 6 pick and Tatis is still there, it's going to be really hard to avoid him, I think. I might have to bite the bullet at some point and just do it.
He's one, correct me if I'm wrong, both of you. He's one of those who does not steal bases feet first because he's very comfortable going head first.
I believe.
Maybe he's compensated by he's going to go, try to reach out with his right arm, so it's not his left shoulder doing that. But sometimes, heat of the moment, you can't make that decision. It's the way the guy's blocking the base if you're going to do a swim move or whatever you're going to do. But I believe Tatis was one of those guys who was like, I don't know. I don't steal feet first. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. And that's, I drafted Tatis in one draft. I think I had the 3rd or 4th pick, and that's who made it to me. But I just can't imagine being willing to pull the trigger on a league that's really, really important to me, on a high money value league. I know that if he stays healthy for the full season, he is easily the best player in fantasy. And so I think there are going to be people who just say, screw the injury risk. I'm hoping for 40, 30, or maybe even greater or something like that. But
I can't be that guy. With my history of my own shoulder problems, I just can't.
Mine too.
That's why I never even considered them.
Yep.
With 1-1, I just can't because it'll be my luck that it's, okay, hey, you got Tatis, and pop, there it goes.
He's especially enticing with the infield-outfield eligibility this year because, outfield has some pretty major drop-offs. So to get a guy who can, play short but also move out to your outfield for you is super enticing. Multi-position eligibility is super enticing for Trey Turner. I think if it wasn't for the fact that Trey Turner had second base eligibility on top of shortstop, I'd probably be taking Jose Ramirez first overall in just about every draft because third base depth is so gross after a while. And so to be able to get those kind of stolen bases from your third baseman to start off a draft, I think is really nice. But Trey Turner is my number 1 guy. That could change. If the Guardians trade Jose Ramirez to a better team, let's say they decide to trade him to a team that needs a third baseman like the Blue Jays, or I can't think of any other team off the top of my head, but I could see myself jumping Jose Ramirez up. But I don't think you can go wrong between Jose Ramirez or Trey Turner. And probably not going wrong. Even in a season in which he was hurt like 4 or 5 times Tatis still had a monster season. So you
Yeah.
probably can't go wrong there. It's just a little bit too risky for the first round for me. Unless I'm around pick 8 and he ends up there. I'm in pick 8 tomorrow on TGFBI. I do not think he's going to be there. So
no, well, he hasn't been anything over the last month. He's been as low as 6 is his max.
I think 6, I'd really have to think about it, because I mean 6, you're saying that Trey Turner's gone, Jose Ramirez is gone, Garrett Cole is likely gone, Bichette's likely gone. Who's probably the other one?
Soto,
Maybe Soto. I don't know that I would take Soto up that high anyways. I mean, I think he's an amazing player, but that seems really high for a guy that I'm not really sure about his stolen base potential. I'm now worried about, the team context in Washington a little bit in terms of how bad his runs and RBIs could potentially be. I think Soto's being overdrafted personally because everybody loves him, but that's just me.
He's gone. He's one of the 5 guys that have gone first overall.
I don't understand.
9.
Yeah, I don't, and maybe I'm overrating. I'm usually not the lineup protection guy. I'm usually the person who rails against that. But maybe I'm overrating that. But Soto, like I'm picking at 8 tomorrow if Soto's there, which I know he will not be, because Shelley Verstraete is picking 2 spots ahead of me, and if Soto gets to Shelley,
yeah,
that will be like the smash of the button. That's so fast.
If not, her dog will attack her.
Yeah, exactly.
Whose name's Soto, for those who don't know.
Yeah, Shelley and I had the first overall pick in the tag team league last year, and we took Soto first overall. So I can't imagine Soto gets to me tomorrow, but if he were, I think I would pass on him, honestly. But that is a different conversation for a different day, and I'm sure we'll be talking on a lot of pods tomorrow about TGFBI, so definitely be on Twitter and on TGFBI. I will have links to all the draft boards on TGFBI.com, to the ADP and all the draft boards that will be updating live. So the next guy is Shohei Ohtani. Speaking of a guy that creates an interesting dilemma going in the first round, he's one of the guys that is projected to steal more than 20 bases, coming off of a monster offensive year and a really good pitching year. Jenny, can you see yourself building around Shohei Ohtani from the first round, considering he's UT only and he's a pitcher and a hitter, which I think adds up quite a bit more risk?
Yeah, the risk is definitely increased. And I generally am not a huge fan of taking UT only guys. I know a year or 2 ago, there was a lot of pushback on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of that had to do with guys like, Nelson Cruz and really high quality players. And Ohtani is one of those. But filling my UT spot first kind of blows my mind a little bit. And I don't know if I can do it. I'm picking 7 tomorrow, and this may be a decision that I have to make. But I don't think it's likely. I also don't know that he's another one that I wouldn't be totally shocked if he didn't continue to steal at the rate that he has been, just, in the interest of keeping him healthy. But I will add, just side note, even though steals are not as big of a deal in best ball, Shohei Ohtani is quite possibly the number 1 overall pick in a best ball league, because he will be automatically rostered either at pitcher or utility, whichever, wherever he fits best in your lineup. So there's that.
And also in daily moves leagues where he's eligible at first, or at UT and as a pitcher, I think easily the first overall pick, considering you get both statistics on. So obviously in this situation we're talking about where he is still one player, but you've got weekly moves. So Jason, what are you doing? Are you willing to take Shohei Ohtani as early as he's going?
I'll actually bring this up because I don't know if folks saw the mixed labor draft earlier this week. Ohtani went 25th.
Wow.
Yeah, like
okay.
That's Dr. Roto in the middle of the second round. And that was
too low.
I was really surprised. I mean, 15 folks in this room, everybody is writing or producing content in this space, and he went just after Max Scherzer and just in front of Starling Marte. that was the range. Just couldn't believe that he slid. But there was no surprises. Honestly, there were no surprises in the first round. Then second round
in labor, he's dual eligible in labor?
Yep.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yep.
That's
Bueller, Devers, Alvarez, Freeman, Machado, Woodruff, DeGrom, Scherzer, Ohtani. That was the second round. That's how it went. So I was rather surprised he went. And I remember because I was doing live stream with Erickson, and he was like, he ended up taking Woodruff only, and later he was like, kind of missed the fact Ohtani had not been taken at that point, where he thought he, maybe in hindsight go back and do that. But I was just surprised to see him fall, because obviously in NFBC format he has not, and he's going there with that. I don't mind filling utility spot. Last year we had a number of guys. In fact, I went into AL labor throwing those guys out. Like that's who I was tossing for nomination, because I wanted to see like I think the first name I threw was Yermin Mercedes, and then I threw Franmil Reyes. I kept until I ended up purchasing one of them. And I did the same thing in a home league, because in a home league, I ended up, there were only so many players that could even take a utility guy. And JD Martinez was UT only last year. And so I strategically filled everybody else's spot and then got JD Martinez for $11 in that league. Because I had to wait until somebody else was until that other person spent the money. Then I threw a JD Martinez, and I said $11, and nobody could top it because nobody else had the utility spot open. There was one other person who had it for $10, and so I just said 11 to get that over with, or 10, something like that, whatever it was. I had to strategically utilize that. And this year, like if you're an AL person, currently, right now, the only guy that qualifies in that spot is Gavin Sheets. He's in that role. And I said it last week. Labor this weekend, Gavin Sheets can be the first guy to throw out. When it comes around to me, if he's not already thrown out, because I want somebody to whoever gets him believes it has no problem filling up the utility spot and losing that in draft flexibility during an auction, which is important to have. So if you're going to fill that out from a strategy, I keep saying that, from a strategy standpoint, then you got to plan for it. Like I'm going to lose that flexibility. And so perhaps you then make your shift to looking for some of those Swiss Army knife type players, your Turners that have second base and shortstop, or drawing a blank on somebody with 3 position eligibility out there. I know there's a couple of guys.
Cronenworth, LeMahieu.
There you go. Thank you. Those types. So you may have to make a shift in that direction to allow yourself some flexibility within the draft, or within. It's not as much as an NFBC, because you don't have to draft in a regular OC, or you don't have to draft an active lineup in the 23. But in a home league or format, you have to, at least you have some flexibility being able to move a guy within positions if you've sacrificed your utility spot.
Yeah. I think it was actually a mock draft. I think my very first mock draft of the year for one of the magazines, I took Ohtani, I think 6th or 7th overall. I didn't mind the way my build turned out, but I've had a really hard time pulling the trigger when I've had the opportunity. I just don't love the idea of starting off with 0 flexibility. I don't mind the fact that he's a pitcher and hitter. I draft him as a hitter. I'm thinking of him as a hitter, and then in season, if I need pitching, if I'm doing well enough in offensive categories where I can move him out of my UT spot, I'm fine with that. And I'm not an anti-UT guy. Anybody who's listened to me over the years knows that I love Nelson Cruz. I'm totally fine clogging my UT spot later on in a draft. That early in a draft, it makes me uncomfortable. It's not saying that I can't do it or that I won't do it necessarily, but it makes me very uncomfortable. And I don't want to be uncomfortable after the first round, because like I said before, earlier in the episode, I want to have as many options as possible for as long as I can in a draft. And I feel like putting a guy like Ohtani in my lineup in round 1, outside of daily moves formats or best ball, limits my options moving forward. And I just don't like doing that in round 1. So the next one is Ronald Cunha versus Boba Shet. Now, I probably should have done these two guys individually. They're going on kind of different ends of the first round in terms of where they're going. However, with the likelihood that the season may be delayed, that gives Acuna more time to be ready for the start of the season. And I think we're going to see him jump up into kind of the top part of the first round here in the next few weeks in drafts. I would not be surprised if he is a top 5 pick in some TGFBI drafts that start tomorrow. So, Jason, who do you prefer out of these guys? And you can kind of just talk in general whether or not these are targets for you in the draft.
Well, I would rather take Bichette here. I'm drawing a blank on who was making this comparison. I was either listening to it, reading it. Somebody talked about, the year Adrian Peterson tore his ACL, came back the next year and won MVP in football. And so if somebody can make those kinds of cuts and runs, why can't Acuna do the same thing? Why can't he pick up where he left off before he crashed into the right field wall and be able to run? I just prefer to go with a guy who's not coming back off surgery. Acuna is still the better player. He went 8th in labor. Bichette went 5th to Brian Bloomfield and Podhorzer. And if you haven't, go check Podhorzer's write-up on the site about his team, because he drafted. It could be the best fantasy team in history, or it could make Justin Mason's 2019 main event team look healthy. One of those outcomes is quite possible on that roster. But he took Acuna with his first pick, and so a slight delay could help. But if we're going to be disappointed anywhere in Acuna's abilities this year, I believe it's going to be in the stolen base group. I just don't see a guy just taking off and running. The hitting, everything else may be good. The fact that they'll have the DH where they don't sign somebody, and believe the whole Marcelo Zuna situation is resolved from MLB's perspective. And so perhaps there are some times when you can put him in the field and let Acuna take spot at DH to give his legs a rest. But that's going to be the area where I expect folks to be disappointed in his outcomes this year.
What about you, Jenny? How do you feel about these two guys?
I'm interested in both of them to a point. I mean, I'm not going to take Acuna too high unless, like you said, we hear about the season being delayed. Boba Shet is obviously very interesting. You can only get him if you have a certain, draft slot. He's, projected to be a 2020 guy. I wouldn't be shocked if his stolen bases fall a little bit and he's more of a 15 guy. But as long as I'm not overestimating what I think he's going to contribute in that category, I'm happy to have him. I mean, at this point, like as we'll get to later, so many of the later guys going to be actively hurting you in other categories. So if you can get a 5-category guy, I'm going to try to do it. And Acuna and Bichette are both that. It's possible that Acuna will not steal as much at the start of the season, but I think that even in a half a season, he can probably steal enough to make it worth your while, and he's good everywhere else. So, the injury is concerning, but doesn't keep me away from him entirely. So I'm happy to get either one of these guys if I can.
Yeah, I'm a little scared of Acuna. Not that I think he's going to get re-injured or anything like that. I do worry about, do the Braves kind of put the brakes on a little bit, and maybe in response to not wanting him to steal as much, maybe move him down the lineup so that way he doesn't have as many opportunities to steal bases. And for that reason, I have not yet pulled the trigger on him. I've also not really been in the opportune spot for him or Bichette. Bichette is kind of clearly going behind the first 3 or 4, and I just haven't drafted in that spot. Not to say I wouldn't take him. I think I like Bichette quite a bit. I think he's going to be a really, really good player, but he's not in the same tier as like the first 3 guys we talked about. And so I think you really have to be like 4, 5, 6 in the drafts, and I just haven't been there yet. So I'm sure I will end up with Bichette at some point. I don't know that I'm going to end up with Acuna at any point. Like we said, I'm picking 8 tomorrow. I don't think he's not in my queue of my top 8 players at the moment. So that could change. We get a little bit of delay to the season, but probably won't for me. Moving right along, we leave the guys who are going in the first round, and we start talking about guys who are going in the top 50. This is not in order of ADP. It's just the order that is actually order of the amount of stolen bases are projected to get. And I don't know if there's anybody who's projected to steal more bases than Alberto Mondesi. And he has snuck his way in to the top 50 after kind of being outside of there recently or earlier on in the draft season. There are concerns with Mondesi, right? Injury, batting average, the general manager saying that they expect him to play about 120 games or so, and limiting him. Down the stretch, he was limited, only not playing every day, but the upside is immense. And I think people are still dreaming on a 2060 season at some point. Jenny, are you willing to take the downside that potentially comes with Mondesi for that immense upside?
Probably not. The problem with him is that what you have to do to build a team around him.
Mhm.
I'm sure I've heard you and Paul say it, and I've heard other people say it, that, if you take him, you can't just take him, you have to take other steals. Well, then why am I taking him?
Mhm.
So I almost feel like, maybe in a league where I'm okay with it being an all or nothing kind of situation, a satellite perhaps.
Mhm.
Maybe you just go for it and you do count on him to be your steals guy. And if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. And because, like we said, the difference between second and 15th place is nothing. So, in a situation like that, maybe I took him. I've taken him once so far, and it was when Jason was running our best ball league in Arizona. I think I got him in like the 11th round or something like that, because he just was falling. And in a best ball league, you don't need to worry about steals specifically. So I think that his price has fallen to a point where it's not crazy, but I don't think in something like a main event, something with fab and high money, I'm gonna be a part of it, just because I have not figured out the right way to build around him, and I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I like that idea though of targeting him in like a league in which a first place wins and second through 15 get nothing. Because I did take him recently in the triple play invitational league, which is so like a small version of TGFBI, right? It's a bunch of industry people and I think some triple play listeners, readers, and then there's a small overall. I think there's only 3 leagues, and it's only $50, and so like I don't really care necessarily about the league prize as much as just winning the overall. In that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I want to win my league, and so it kind of fit there. But again, like you said, I don't feel comfortable just drafting Mondesi, right? I want Mondesi plus other speed sources. I've projected him for like 25 stolen bases, and hope that I get 60, but the chances that I actually do, I don't want to set myself up for failure by not drafting other stolen bases. It's unlikely he's going to fall on my teams as we go forward through draft season, just because the risk is so great. I think the only reason I even entertain taking him is because third base is so bad and he's third base eligible this year. And so when you start kind of getting past him in terms of third base, it gets really gross really quickly. And so that's been kind of one of the reasons why I'm willing to attack and go after Mondesi there. Jason, where are you at on Mondesi?
I don't want to. I really, really, really don't want to. I mean, if you look over the last couple of years, it's like we've said, if we could bottle up every September and just, give me half a season, stretch that across that level of production into 3 months, or the what he does in September, because it's awesome. But it's the other 5 months of the season which are problematic. But he doesn't. His best asset speed. He does not walk enough to take advantage of that, and he strikes out too much. But around that, when he's on the field, magic happens. And so that's why people are still there. But it's the fact that he's still going in the mid 50s, and this was another guy that Podhorzer took on the team. But the fact that he's going to mid 50s speaks to this problem of speed in and of itself. This is why he's going in the mid 50s. because again, maybe he could get 20, 60, but he's never hit more than 14 home runs in a season. And it's just really tough to, as Jenny was saying, you're not just taking him. And like we were talking with Turner earlier, I can take Turner and ignore it for a little while, but sometimes you take Mondesi because he's projected for the most steals out there. Like he's 45 is usually about the mean for what I've seen for his projected steals. But you have to take something else because you can't just get kicked out if he decides to get hurt the day before the season starts like he did last year. I was chasing steals all season in Tal, and thank God that Starling Marte came to the AL. Because that's what, between him coming to the AL last year and then Mondesi playing in September, I was able to get out of dead last in stolen bases and get up into the middle. And if you score below 60 points, you lose fab. I got up over the 60-point threshold because of the gains I made in steals in September because Mondesi decided to show up and Marte was running there. So that helps. But it was a grind all season to get out of dead last in steals because when you come in out of an AL only auction, there's only I've got good enough speed. I wasn't trying to win the category, but when 80% of my plan went out the window on day one, that was problematic.
Yeah, I think one thing that, is kind of a misconception in leagues with a big overall, like the main event or something like that, is that you need to take these guys who are potential home run hitters, not literal home run hitters, but, like guys who can do that for you, like Mondesi. And I don't think that's really not the case. I mean, if you look at the teams that do well in the overall main event, they have a lot of safe players. They're not going for, the big, Mondesi types. They're not going for the all or nothing type guys. So I think that can sometimes be misunderstood.
And I mean, one of the best panels I've ever watched was a Arizona Fall League panel in 2019 with Dave Potts and Vlad Sedler and I think Rob Silver.
I was sitting in there.
Yeah, and Dave talking exactly about that is often people think, and I thought when I went into my first main event, set $1,700 on fire, that upside's the play. Go for the upside, go for the ceiling, go for the roof. You look at a lot of these main event overall winners, and you can actually, beauty of NFBC is you can go and look at all the previous leagues and see who drafted who. And you can see like these leagues are often pretty boring. Like they're just guys who accumulated the most amount of plate appearances, the most amount of innings, and they were good, right? They don't have bad players or anything, but they had all these accumulators that really set them apart from the rest of the league, and they don't often have these shoot for the moon Byron Buxton Mondesi types. So
that was such a good panel that it was so crowded that you and I were sitting on the floor together.
Yeah. And I was happy too. I mean, I felt bad for the other panels going around at that time because I think everybody was in that room.
You're just kicking Pod's team because he took Buxton right after he took Mondesi.
Yeah, I love Pod Orser. I absolutely love him. I think he's one of the nicest guys in the world. I've got a great funny story that I'm not going to tell today, but about the first time we met. But he has so much risk on that team. There is like absolutely no way that is going to be successful. I hope I'm wrong. I hope, because it caused a huge stir on Twitter between a bunch of high stakes people, a bunch of industry people, and then just some regular Joes. To the point where I had to log off for a few hours because it monopolized my workday.
It's like a 16-team parlay. It's like really, like if this is going to hit, I'm going to throw $100 at a 16-team parlay, and if this thing hits, I'm going to. So it was just funny to watch the build happen because after okay, you took Cunha, fine. DeGrom, okay, yeah, there's some risk. Perez, fine. Once you took Mondesi, then it was like, okay. Jeff and I in the thread, we were like, okay, he's going to be taking Buxton. Yep. And then pitcher-wise, he needs a pitcher. He's going to be taking Verlander. This is obvious. Yep. Kershaw's got to be coming up. Yep. It is just like Severino, Syndergaard. It was a Carrasco. It's like all these guys. It was just like once you're into it, lean into it. Just go for it. That's exactly what he did. But to his point, as he says in his article, if he finds that the market tends to undervalue these guys, I mean, there's a reason why we undervalue them, but if they can all hit in the same season again, he could have an amazing season with this roster, and he could also be out of it by the middle of the year and light $1,700 of Monopoly money on fire, like you did in 19. Although that was Monopoly money.
There's a Stanford professor that explained the odds of winning the lottery, and this professor said that the odds of winning the lottery are going into an Olympic-sized swimming pool with one green M&M in it, and the rest is filled with just regular other colored M&Ms, and finding that green M&M blindfolded. And if you put together teams like this, yes, there's a chance you're going to find that green M&M, but more likely than not, you're going to have to do what I did in 2019, which was work my ass off to not finish dead last in the overall. Because on top of the injury risk he already took, what if other guys that he didn't think were injured? What if Sal Perez gets injured? Like, I mean, you couldn't sustain all those injuries. I said, love Podhorser. There's part of me that hopes he wins that league, just to shove it in people's faces who are brutally mean on Twitter for no apparent reason about it.
Yeah, I was watching that the stream that you guys were doing with Erickson and Zinke, and I think that what Fred Zinke said was probably right, that the most likely scenario is that like half the guys stay healthy, or a portion of them stay healthy, a portion of them get hurt, and then you're just kind of middling.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, you really kind of need them all to stay healthy, which is, that much more unlikely.
Yeah. And it's just so hard for it all to come together. And then the other part of me hopes he does not he does not do well, because I'm drafting like none of those guys. So if they do well, then some of my other teams may be in some trouble. So, but I love Mike. He's a good dude. He's a really good analyst. He's won, big industry leagues before, so he knows what he's doing. Yeah,
and his projections came out this week. So
yep,
check on those.
I get them every year. So Pod does great work. So. Moving on to the aforementioned Starling Marte, who helped Jason get out of that basement in stolen bases. He is now with the Mets, and he is going pretty squarely in that second round because of his stolen base potential, coming off of a monster second half with the A's. Jenny, what are your thoughts? Are you drafting Starling Marte?
I would like to not. I mean, I'm open to it because he's somebody in the first 4 rounds that can get me steals, and depending on how things fall and where my draft pick is, that might be what I'm doing. But I kind of hope I don't have to. I think that we are paying for, potentially a quote unquote career year. I don't know that he is going, like steals are so much about desire and team desire and player desire. And, he may have really had it, in him to steal every time he got on base last season. That doesn't mean he's going to want to do it this year. That doesn't mean the team is going to want to do it this year. So I also just generally, I know one of the things that I've learned from Glenn Colton and Rick Wolf is, I don't generally draft guys in their first year on a new contract. So I hope that I don't need to draft him, but if he's better than the later option. So if it comes down to it, I'll do it if it works out that way.
Jason, what about you? Are you rewarding Marte's stellar performance for your team by putting him back on your team?
Not the price. And I'm scared for a few reasons. Jenny brought up one about him moving to a new team, but I'm also really concerned about Buck Showalter running the Mets now. And Buck Showalter, when he had the reins of Baltimore and had a couple of guys that ran, he did not leverage them as often because he was playing for the home run, because he had Chris Davis before Chris Davis sucked. And he had Manny Machado. Like, he had these types of guys. And so he decided, I'm going to play for the 3-run home run instead of try to manufacture runs. And you look at this Mets lineup and they have the talent. So can you imagine him letting Marte run pretty much freely as Miami and Oakland did, particularly Oakland, letting him do whatever he wants when they're trying to set up the middle part of that offense. So I'm concerned about the change of location, the change of manager who's got a track record of not leveraging these types of athletes to their full potential on the stolen bases. Whereas if he's going in the back half of the second round, he went in labor to Stefania Bell in the right after the Otani pick, and in between Tim Anderson. But I'm concerned. Like we talked about Cunha being that disappointment in the first round with steals. Marte to me is the next guy in the second round that we're going to look back and be like, where did the steals go? And Buck Showalter is going to be sitting there with that stoic look on his face, like, did you not believe me the previous seasons? He's still going to get double digits, but it's, when you look at his managerial track record, and happy to put a link in the show notes so you can look at this because Baseball Reference does a great job with this. You can take a look at the rate of his base runners stealing second and third. And I want to say Marte had a number of attempts stealing third last year, and that's something that Showalter does not like doing. And so wherever the steals are projected for Marte, I would shave 10, 15% off them and plan around that.
Yeah. In 2021, Starling Marte stole 47 bases. In 2014, the Baltimore Orioles under Buck Showalter stole 44 bases. In 2015, the Baltimore Orioles under Buck Showalter stole 44 bases. In 2016, the Baltimore Orioles under Buck Showalter stole 19 bases as a team. In 2017, the Baltimore Orioles under Buck Showalter stole 32 bases. Now, maybe this is going to be more team contacts. They didn't have as many guys who could steal. I don't know how much I buy that. I also don't know how much he's going to be in charge of that. Like, will the front office, who's gone out and gotten Starling Marte and Mark Canha, guys who can steal bases, say, no, you're going to let these guys run a little bit and Buck's going to listen? I don't know. I also know that Starling Marte has had a pretty lengthy injury history over the course of his career. I love Starling Marte. I've always been a Starling Marte guy. I can't pay a top 25 price, which is pretty much where he's going at this point. If I'm at the back end of like the 2-3 turn and he gets to me, I think that's a conversation I'm willing to have depending on how I started. But more than likely, if I'm drafting on that 2-3 turn, I've got Turner or I've got Jose Ramirez. I don't necessarily need a Starling Marte and the risk that he comes with. So it seems unlikely, as much as I've liked him in the past, that I'm going to end up with him. I think the only real opportunity is if for some reason I have like a top 5 pick and I go Cole and in that second round he gets back around to me. I think that is probably the only scenario in which I'm probably taking him, which is a bummer. I'm rooting for him. I like Starling Marte a lot as a player. I've always rooted for him, but he's just probably not going to be on many of my teams this year.
And we talked about opportunities, about how often he was running. So last year, again, using Baseball Reference, he had 193 stolen base opportunities last year. And a stolen base opportunity is defined as the man's on base and the base in front of him is unoccupied. Now, I'm not talking about third base and home. I'm talking he's on first or second, and second or third is unoccupied. So he had 193 chances, attempted 52 stolen bases, and was 47 out of 52, which puts him at a 27% attempt rate. Then the previous, in 2020, that was a 12% attempt rate. In 2019, it was a 17% attempt rate. So last year is like, just look at the 3-year trend, he went 17-12, and then then with the Marlins / A's, 27%. Now he's going to a manager who has historically not done so much. So I would expect movement back towards 2019, which is where he was 25 of 31, and 25 would be really good this year. It's just not, and we're talking about a guy who's going to be turning 33 in this season. To me, I'd be stunned if we got a repeat of 40 plus steals out of him. Obviously safer than taking Mondesi, but at the same time, you have to expect a decline in stolen bases between the change in scenery, the change in who's running the ship. And I do hear you a little bit, Justin, on the Mets didn't go out and get these guys only for Showalter to sit them. Or like put the red light on them. But if they wanted to be that heavy-handed with their management, they would have gotten a younger manager. They wouldn't have gone out and got a Showalter, because Showalter is not going to play that game. If they wanted a puppet, they can go find somebody. If they want, they brought Showalter in for a reason, and they want him to do what he does. And Unfortunately, Molina's going to
Mets
be at the
Mets gonna Mets. That's I mean, that's I feel bad for Mets fans because I really would like to.
It's going to be the year, man.
Yeah,
You got to believe. Is that what their slogan is? Right? You got to believe.
Yeah, I don't know. They shouldn't have a slogan at this point. I'm going to pair the next three in this kind of tier together. That's Whit Merrifield versus Cedric Mullins versus Trevor Story. All three are going within like 5 or 6 picks of each other, kind of in the beginning of the middle of third round. So, Jenny, which one out of these guys are you most likely to draft? And is there any that you're probably not drafting at all?
I'm open to any of them just because, of the fact that I need to get speed in this first round. So you can't be too picky. But I probably would lean the most towards Mullins.
That's right.
I took him in the $1,000 draft champions that I just finished. He fell to, I got him at round 3, pick 10. I think that was fantastic. I will take that. I mean, it was 1 pick after Jordan Romano, so if that gives you any context.
Yeah.
But Merrifield is good. Merrifield should continue running. Like, nothing's really changed in his situation. He's older too, which, I can scare you, but I don't think is, just on its own a reason to necessarily avoid him. He's not going to give you the power. And I think Cedric Mullins probably isn't going to give you a ton of power either. But, if he can get in the high teens and still runs, that's good enough for me. And, he should be not hurt you in batting average. That's good. Trevor Story, I like him in theory, but I don't, without knowing where he's going to be, I'm worried about doing that in any kind of, high investment league, just because, what if he goes to Houston? They don't really steal very much, so it's a possibility that he could go somewhere where the team or the manager puts the brakes on him. So that worries me a little bit. I'm sure he'll still be a good contributor overall, but if you're just specifically talking about speed, I would worry a little bit because we don't know where he's going.
I think that's fair. Jason, what about you? Who's your favorite? Anybody you're avoiding?
Not much to add. I mean, I've talked about my issues with Merrifield, the fact that he's never been hurt, and it's just in this day and age for somebody to be a Wolverine like that and just never miss any single amount of time and play the volume of stuff he has. Something's got to give at some point. And if I'm saying that, and I'm saying he may not be a top 60 player because this is the year that gives, I don't want to take him with the second pick of the third round like Fred did. Mullins went 28th to Tim McLeod towards the end of the second round, and Story went towards the back of the third to Ray Flowers. Yeah, I do want to take my shot on Story. I would actually love if he went to Houston, given his pull tendencies, and you could really have a fun time there. And so I would take Story, but I'm not. But I think Story's properly priced. I would have if I was picking where Mullins and Merrifield went, I would have passed on both of them at that price.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody who's ever heard this podcast before has not heard me just gush about Cedric Mullins. So, I mean, clear to me, he's the prize of this trio. I've taken him as early as 15th overall in the AFL draft back in October. I don't think I would do that again, but I've been loving getting him sometimes in the third round. If he's available to me, I think pick 25 is where my second round pick comes around.
You're going to take him
tomorrow. I'm likely going to take him depending on who I got in the first round.
You're going to take him.
There's little to no chance that he makes it back around with everybody in the draft knowing who I am.
But as Jenny said, you said that you got him the 10th pick of the third round. See, that price I would take. Like, I'm not out on anybody, but if Mullins were sitting there towards the back end of the third round, I would take the chance just because all that volume.
At the same time that Jenny made that pick, I was in a different draft and got him with the third pick or the 11th pick of the third round.
Okay.
And so I had started off. I believe it was the league I started off with pocket aces, and then landed Mullins in the third. So,
but I believe he's been safely going in the second round in every one I've done so far, either done or reserved. He's been safely a second round pick.
He has been dropping in drafts. So yeah, he was kind of a mid to sometimes early second round pick early on in draft season. He's been slowly moving down the ADP to the point now where I think his ADP, and I'm going to double check just to make sure I don't misspeak. His ADP in Draft Champions Leagues since the beginning of this month, so we've got a month's worth of drafts, that's 35 DCs, is pick 35. So he is into the third round at this point in 15-team leagues, almost out of the third round in 12-team leagues.
I take that back.
So,
he went 313 to DVR in the AFL Riders League that we talked about last week.
Yep.
Yeah, he went 313 in that, and that was on the heels of an Ohtani and a Betts selection that he had made. So that was DVR's first 3 picks were Ohtani, Betts, Mullins.
So I don't have a problem taking Whit Merrifield or Trevor Story. I've not ended up, or I think I've gotten Story once. I've not ended up with Merrifield at this point. I don't really have any concerns on either of them. I think they're both going to be kind of what they've been. What Jenny just said though about Story does kind of scare me a little bit. I did not even think about the fact that he could end up on a team like Houston and probably not run as much, though I think he would still be a really, really good player. So I don't mind taking him where he's going, but I don't think he ends up in Houston. I keep thinking he's going to end up in with the Angels. That's the spot that they've got such a big hole there. I guess Philadelphia's a good spot too. So, moving right along to guys going outside of the top 50, and I think we have to start with Milestraw. He is the player projected to steal the most bases going outside of the top 50. Jason, you talked about him earlier. Would you be willing, if you, I guess, needed to, take Milestraw? Or are you doing everything you can to avoid doing that?
That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to do everything that I can to avoid getting in this pool, because I'm just going to run through the 5 names we have listed because of the flaws, and I've had to take at least one of these guys. But you got Milestraw, Tommy Edmond, Jazz Chisholm, Akil Baddoo, and Tyler Wade. And I have Chisholm in a league, but I don't mind targeting Chisholm because multi-position, believe in the athleticism. I know the before and after injury numbers. James Anderson is on one end of the love him, and there are other people that are on the opposite end of like I'm out with it. Baddoo, Paul's on the I love him, and a lot of people are fading Baddoo as well. A name that I would throw into this, because actually, no, I'll save that for the post 250 the piece of that. But each one of these guys comes with their own risk. But again, of this group, Chisholm's my particular favorite because I believe he's got the most overall offensive upside with the least amount of risk. We know what his risk is now. The strikeouts were problematic, but the other guys either have bigger offensive flaws or lack of a track record, or in Tyler Wade's case, no power. And that's where Chisholm, he's a guy that's being taken, 5th, 6th round. I'm trying to remember where I've taken him, who could take a step forward, whereas the other guys are, I don't see them taking that step forward. Yeah, I took Chisholm towards the end of the 6th round in the AFL Riders League.
All right.
That's it.
What about you? Are you avoiding Milestraw there, Jenny?
Hopefully. I think the problem is, it's hard to say, okay, I can wait on steals, or if I don't get steals, I'll just get Milestraw. Well, there might be 6 people in your league who want to do that. And then, so if you start jumping him up and up and up in 80, in the draft to try to get him, then you're like really starting to get to a point where you're costing yourself, perceived value there. So, I've heard people make an argument for and against whether or not he could lose his job. And if you have a legitimate skills argument as to why he's good and he'll keep it, that's fine. But the argument that I don't agree with is, who else do they have? I don't like that. I don't think in general it's a good argument, because a team will find somebody that, if somebody's not playing well, if Milestraw is not playing well, they'll find somebody else. I mean, I go a lot to the Clippers games here in Columbus. There are guys there who can come up and take his spot if he's not playing well. So,
yeah.
If you think he has the skills to hold it, then that's your opinion, and that's great. I don't want to, if I can help it. I hope I don't have to.
Yeah, I think he's got the skills to keep it. I think defensively is good enough. He makes a lot of zone contact. it can be weak contact at times, but he makes a lot of contact. I do think that he has the skills to kind of keep that role. The problem is I don't want to be put in a situation where a bunch of my stolen bases are wrapped up into one guy, because if he does lose his job, is anybody going to be surprised? Not to mention if he gets hurt, then where are all my stolen bases? So
Yeah.
I think it is more of a Hail Mary play than coming into my draft deciding this is who I want to get. It's oh my God, I'm at pick 1 something, and I go, oh no, I don't have enough stolen bases. All right, Milestraw, come on down, as opposed to entering my draft with a plan that I'm going to be getting Milestraw on this team.
But like I said earlier, there's going to be another team in that boat. If you're in a larger league, the more likely that is to happen. I would even say, in just using the AL, using labor or tout coming up, there's always, if you're in an auction, you think about, there's always another team that's got a lot of money. There's never just one team out there on the island. There may be at the first break, but there's always another team that has money. So there's going to be 2 teams that have money. You could also, and you have the confluence of those 2 money teams also both needing speed. Then all of a sudden you're going to be paying where you thought, look, I get him late, maybe I'll get him for 15, 16. You're paying 20 because he literally would be the last guy, like right now, because the guy that I wanted to mention after 250 is ADP is 265, but he's a free agent right now. So we don't know where he's going to be there. But with Straw, that's what I always want to get. I always want to avoid those situations where I'm not having to compete against the other guy with the big money or get into that. At that point, if you've punted, you should have already made up your mind and say, okay, at this point, I know I'm going to have to pay, so maybe I'll drive up the price a little bit and I'm going to move on. But you better have plans elsewhere. And then it's like, okay, I need to throw whatever dart I can in the reserve rounds at stolen base sources because I'm going to need them. And you try, that's, last year that would have been Tyler Wade. I know right now he's projected to be a mostly day shortstop, but Tyler Wade was one of those safe steals guys in AL only formats because he wasn't starting for the Yankees, but they did like to let him run. And so it's like, okay, I'll take that dart and see what happens. But I really want to avoid the situation where I'm in an auction having to bid up there. So watch me get in that situation. I'm going to try to avoid watch. You're going to be like, I thought Jason said he didn't want to do that. Well, if I end up purchasing Milestraw in either one of labor and talent, it was not by design. I'll tell you that now.
Well, and you're lucky that I'm not in your labor or tout auction because I'm the type of person that looks for the scarcest category, and that's what I throw out. Nicky Lopez and Milestraw will be one of my first nominations at Tout Wars this year, just so I can not let people wait till the end to try to fill that stolen base. I want to put pressure on people early. But that being said, let's move on to Tommy Edmond versus Jazz Chisholm. There are some people, both these guys are somewhat polarizing. There are people in the industry that, really like one or the other, really dislike one or the other. Jason, where are you at? I know you just said you just drafted Chisholm in the 6th round in a league, but where are you at on both Chisholm versus Tommy Edmond?
Yeah, I want Chisholm, and they're not even in labor. They weren't that far apart. Rudy Gamble of Rasball took Chisholm in the towards the end of the 5th round, and then Edmund went 3 picks later to Steve Gardner, who needed. And here's a good example of a team that needed speed. Right, opened up with Corbin Burns, Rafael Devers, Pete Alonso, JT Real Muto, and Edwin Diaz. And so he was almost forced into taking Edmund at that pick. And perhaps maybe he would have taken Chisholm had he made it that way. But that's a team where it's like, I need to have speed out of the first, and he didn't have any. And so I believe Edmund's selection there was more driven by need than it was the value, because then you have Stanton and Bregman, Brandon Lau, Jonathan India. Like, you have those types going behind them. I would take all of those guys over Edmund. But because of the way the build started there, he had to take that. Whereas Rudy had Albies, Alvarez, Giolito, Franco, and so he too would have needed speed and made Chisholm a target. So Chisholm may have been pushed up there because of that same thing. So, but we're talking about round 5 and builds being adjusted by needs on speed by the 5th round because of how teams were being put together, and that's a strategy you're going to have to consider, the listener, as you're trying to put your own team together.
I think both these guys are one of the reasons why you want to take speed earlier in the draft. Jenny, what are your thoughts on Chisholm versus Tommy Edmond?
I see them as fairly equivalent to each other. Edmund obviously has a little bit longer track record versus Chisholm. The big thing about Chisholm is that people, say, to point out the fact that he started out so hot and then tailed off. I'm kind of about that. But I think the big thing is I think that you're trading average that Edmund can provide for a little bit more power that Jazz has. So it kind of just depends what you need. I'm I'm okay with either one. There's also the position difference, with Jazz being multi-position eligible in the infield, and Edmund being, what does he have? He has second in outfield.
Second
He'll go
outfield for
second.
Edmond. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it just depends a lot on team needs. I'll do it if I need to. Don't love it.
Yeah, I think when they fall into the right kind of spot for me is when I'm going to be targeting them. I was a little bit higher on Edmund coming into draft season. I'm a little bit worried necessarily about maybe the safety of his job long term. They've got Gorman. They have both Paul DeYoung and Edmund Sosa. So I think he really actually needs to hit in order to keep that job as a full-time guy, not revert into some sort of super utility role. And so for that reason, I've been kind of laying off drafting him later in drafts. Chisholm, I absolutely love. I think the only question mark for me in Chisholm is the injuries. I mean, he was nicked up quite a bit last year. But I think if you build a pretty good kind of safe base at the beginning of the draft, he can fit onto most teams. So he's a guy that I got in the Bottle of Podcast draft at a really, really great price. I think around pick 90. So especially when he drops in draft, he's a guy that I tend to really like. And especially if you are playing in leagues without an overall component and you're willing to kind of devalue your punt batting average, Jazz Chisholm can be a monster, I think, in those kind of formats. So
when Edmund too, I think even more so than him actually losing his job, he might get moved down in the batting order. He doesn't have a great OBP, so if he's hitting 7, 8, 9, I think that's going to hurt his steals potential a lot more than if he's sitting at the top of the lineup.
Yeah. Speaking of guys who have a lot of either detractors or advocates, Akil Baddoo is a very polarizing player. Jason, you already kind of mentioned or talked a little bit about him. But Jenny, what are your thoughts on Akil Baddoo? Is he a guy you're targeting in drafts?
I haven't yet, and I really don't know what to make of him. I normally will stick with somebody who's done it for more than one season. But in the right situation and the right lineup, it depends on how much risk I've taken earlier in the draft and things like that. I'm open to it. I honestly don't know what to think of him. He sort of just seemed like he came out of nowhere last year, and I don't like why did he come out of nowhere? Was he not performing before? I know he was a Rule 5 guy, but I don't know enough about his history to know whether this is reliable or not. So I honestly don't have an opinion.
He got injured pretty severely in the minor leagues, which I think delayed his kind of development. I can't remember if it was Tommy John or something else, but and so then he was left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft, and because he was originally, I believe, on the Twins.
Yep.
So yeah. And then but suffered a severe injury in the minors, and that kind of stunted his development. I've been taking kind of calculated shots. It's when I feel like I've got a really solid, strong, not risky base, because I think there's a huge range of outcomes on a guy like Baddoo. And so I don't want to mix that with other huge range of outcomes. So I don't necessarily want to mix that with a Mondesi or a Buxton or guys that or a Jazz Chisholm. So for the most part, I've been making some calculated plays because I do believe in the speed for sure. And I think the power is somewhat legitimate. I just worry what the strikeout rate is going to be and how much contact he's going to make. And if he ends up getting platooned because of that. So, yeah. Jason, what are your thoughts on Baddoo?
He went, when I looked at labor, he went towards the back of the 10th round to Tim McLeod. I like that a lot better than me taking him to lead off the 8th in a DC that I did. But that gets back to team construction. That was the one that I did pocket aces and Lindor, Clase, Brandon Lau, Nolan Arenado, Giancarlo Stanton. That's how I opened that one. I was like, oh my God, this team is slow. And so I went and looked and said, what is the best? What is the player that has the most upside in the running game at this point to avoid getting into that I got to draft Milestraw hole? And it was Badu. And then I ended up the same kind of decision forced me into an Ahmed Rosario pick in the 12th round because you got to go 50 rounds in this one. So I was trying to build speed the rest of the draft after not addressing it, which was really the impetus for me writing that particular article, saying it can get away from you in a hurry and you spend the rest of it trying to chase it down with it. So I really didn't like taking him in the 8th round, but these are some of the decisions you will be forced to make as you put your own teams together. But we're moving out of DC season into Fab League season, so it'll be a little easier in that regard because you can pick it up in season or you can make reserve, try to pick it up in the reserves. But this is normally not a player that I have on my team because for the reasons both of you outlined, there's a risk profile here I am not comfortable with. But need drove it. I had to put my comforts aside and say, this is what I need. And so I took it.
All right. Moving on to the final guy of this group. One name is not like the others. All these other guys are being drafted pretty much inside the top 150 in just about every draft. And then there's Tyler Wade. So Tyler Wade currently his ADP is 419. He is the only player really outside the top 200 projected to steal 20 bases. Jason, are you interested in Tyler Wade, who at the moment with a lockout appears to have somewhat of a full-time role in Los Angeles?
Yeah, even without that, I mean, when you look at a guy that's going to qualify like in Tout, because Tout uses a 15-game eligibility, he qualifies at 3 spots. In a normal league, he qualifies at 3rd and short. So, yeah, you're going to have some interest.
In NFBC, he qualifies at 3rd, short, and outfield.
Oh, I'm looking at, because they have it. Oh, they have it, because Fangraphs, we have it split out in left, center, and right field. That's why. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm sorry. So, yeah, there's interest in that. This would be a reserve pick. Like I said, even in part-time duty with the Yankees, he still ran. If Tyler Wade comes on base, he runs. He's going to be with Joe Madden. Joe Madden does like letting his guys run. So even in a reserve capacity, would expect some value from Wade in the stolen base department. I fail to see how he doesn't steal 12 to 15 bags this year. It's just going to be how much he plays because in a full-time role, the bat could be really empty because he's going to hit 9. Just doesn't. I don't see any other way he doesn't do anything but hit 9th. But if he hits 9th and he gets on, look who's going to be on in front of. And it's not like they're going to. You can still let him run because you're not going to say, "Oh, I'm going to go ahead and put Ohtani on base and pitch to Trout with Wade and Ohtani on base." Because Lord knows those two can probably score both of them on a single with their speed because Wade is one of the fastest players in baseball. So there's definitely some interest there. With the flexibility and the speed potential, but that it's all of his values tied up in that because it doesn't have anything else.
Jenny, are you interested in Tyler Wade?
I think I'm more interested in him in a Fab League than in something like a Draft Champions, just because he's so droppable if the situation doesn't work out. Like you said yourself, potentially Trevor Story could end up there. Yep. So, if somebody else comes in, he might lose his spot and then you get rid of him. I think that's in some ways easier to manage than an Edmond or a Chisholm or a Badu that, if they're not performing or, get hurt, then you're sort of stuck in this limbo of wanting to keep them on your bench while they're not playing. And that's something that I'm really trying to avoid this year. I'm trying to be very conscious of what I think I'm going to do with a player if he's not performing or is hurt. And I don't want to have a lot of guys sitting on my bench that are not usable. So somebody who's going to be a easy decision in the first few weeks is appealing in a certain way. And if you're really stuck for steals, he's definitely an option, but he is going to be actively hurting you in almost every other category. So you're paying a price if you're starting him.
Yeah, I actually like him in both formats. I like him in draft and hold just because he's triple eligible. And Joe Madden likes these guys who can play all over the place. And so I do think they're going to sign somebody to play shortstop full time. I can't imagine they're entering the season with Wade as a full timer or anybody, or Yifo is there too, I guess. They're not entering with those guys as the full time shortstop. At worst, it's going to be like an Andrelton Simmons type. I don't know if it's Simmons necessarily, but I think that his role is going to be like a super utility guy. Jonathan VR-esque, right? A guy that I think Jason's going to talk about here in a second as we give late dart throws. And so, like, yeah, I like him in a DC because he's triple eligible. He can fill a lot of different spots for me if I have injuries later on in the season. I like him in a fab league for the exact same reason you mentioned, because if he's not playing every day and he's not helping me in other categories too, I can easily drop him to the waiver wire. But he also fills a lot of spots from my reserve list in case I have an early injury or something like that. So, all right. I asked you guys to put together maybe some names going outside the top 250 that aren't Tyler Wade that you think could end up jumping into these guys that are stealing 20 bases. Jason, I know you're jumping, but I'm going to go with Jenny first. Jenny, give us some names that you're interested in because you're the host or you're the guest.
I should say VR just to steal him, right? No, but I won't. I'm going to go with Dylan Moore, who
that's okay.
is playing.
You chose a UCF guy. That's good.
Okay, all right, good. I'm glad. He's a tough one because his playing time is questionable because of how poorly he played last year. But he was so good in 20 that he's displayed the skill of being an everyday starter. And even when he didn't play every day last year, he still stole bases. So I think that there is a world in which Dylan Moore is a regular starter and steals. He generally hits it in the air too much, but does not have a good exit velocity, which is not a good combination to have. So with his speed, maybe he would be better served to hit it on the ground a little more. But I think he's an option, and he's another one that's easily droppable if he comes down to it. If you want to go real late, I think that Elvis Andrus. I mean, we're talking like draft champions here because he's kind of gross, but he should at this point be playing every day. He still steals. And when it gets down to it, the late shortstop options can be rough. So I think in a really really late situation, Elvis Andrus can be a good choice. And a little bit higher up, Vidal Brujan, I think can be a good one. He is going at about 325, I think, in the last month. So he's another one that's going to be. We don't know yet exactly what his role is going to be, but if he gets the role. He's got a lot of speed, so he could work if the things fall the right way.
Jason, who are some names you got?
Two names. One is VR. Obviously, I've been sitting on it. Because I tweeted this out last week. Here is the full list of players who have had double-digit home runs and steals over the past 5 full seasons, and their ADP over the last month. Trey Turner, 2. Jose Ramirez, 4. Mookie Betts, 16. Marcus Semien, 43. Francisco Lindor, 51. Javier Baez, 63. Jonathan VR, 266. The only thing holding him down right now, the only reason he's outside the 250 is because he's unemployed. He doesn't have a job yet. Mm-hmm. But let's say Texas was like, hey, we just lost Josh Young. We need a third baseman. Hey, VR, you can play third base. Why don't you come here? And oh, by the way, you can hit leadoff for us too. And Willie Calhoun back down the lineup. And all of a sudden, you got VR setting the table for a Seager, for Semien, in that group, and his value goes way up. So it's like right now, if you're drafting this week, this is the last time you're going to get VR at this price, because as soon as he gets a job, because of what he's done, those were numbers over the seasons, but he had 40 steals in 2019 playing every day for Baltimore. He had 35 steals the season before that. He had 16 in the shortened season, 14 last year for the Mets, who just didn't run as much. So if he gets to an opportunity where the environment's right, where he's got the playing time and a manager that's going to let him run, there could be a lot of upside here. And so his price, and then, staying in Texas, because I know he burned so many folks last year, but Leody Taveras, last year he was inside the top 200. He's now about 600 in ADP, but like he's down in winter ball right now in Aguilas in the Dominican Winter League. He's got more walks and strikeouts. He's 11 of 12 in stolen bases. So it's like if you're in a single league format, I can't recommend taking him. If he's in a fab league, leave him in fab. Try to do that. But like if you're in a single league, if you're an AL only deeper league, I don't know how you don't take a shot at him in the reserves just with the speed. Because if we were willing to take him where we were last year, you can't just like throw him away. Be like, forget it. One bad season, he was garbage. I'm not going to do anything because he was 13 of 18 in steals in Paul's backyard. Round Rock for those, he was right there, and then he was 10 of 11 at the major league level, and then 11 of 12 in winter league. So it's like he's still running. When he gets on base, he wants to run, and who knows what the playing time is going to be. But those are the two guys I would look at late. VR is not going to be there much longer, whereas depending on the depth of your league, Taveras makes for a very interesting dart throw late.
This is the podcast that I think of when I think of Jonathan VR, because I remember Paul and Justin, hyping him up over the last few years, and now he's Jason's guy.
Yeah. Somehow he's not my guy anymore.
Took me a while to come around. No, but just when you look at what's out there, and this year it's really just because of the speed, and when it just always stuns me to see him still sitting out there that late because he doesn't have a job. But like people say, when Nelson Cruz, when he signs, he's going to jump up, but why not VR with what he's done and the opportunity? One of our listeners, Dustin McComas, was like, what if the Rockies signed him? It's like he could go to like top 150. He could eclipse Milestraw and be like, all of a sudden we're taking VR and we're going to let Straw be the back end choice. So it'll be very interesting to see where he ends up in this, because he could fill a few needs for some folks on the roster depending on where he lands.
Oakland.
Yeah,
that wouldn't help Elvis Andrus.
Yeah. Well, I just think they're gonna, after they trade Chapman and Olsen, they're gonna have need for VR type players that can just play every day.
Somebody's gonna need to play.
It feels like he likes to just go to these crappy teams because he gets full-time playing time. So, you guys mentioned a number of guys that I'm very interested in. A guy who used to be my guy in the industry that I hadn't talked about a lot or drafted at all this season, Jorge Mateo in Baltimore. If there could be a way for him to get into the lineup, especially if guys like Austin Hayes continue to get injured, and Rougned Odor. So, I think he has some passive playing time, could be really interesting late. Michael Taylor, he's going outside of the top 390 picks currently. Jaron Duran is a former top prospect that debuted last year and sucked, and every time that happens, people in the fantasy community just kind of bury those guys. So he's a guy I think that probably should be getting drafted higher than he is, currently going around pick 385. Victor Robles, I don't know what to make of Victor Robles. Shelly tweeted at me yesterday, make sure we don't take him in the tag team league because he keeps ending up on all of my teams. And I said, no promises. I'll fall for that trick again, especially when he's going outside the top 350 picks. So there's and of course I would be remiss if I didn't mention Bradley Zimmer as my boy. I said a couple days ago, that my bold prediction is he goes 15-30 this year. So have to pick him. And Cole Tucker, another one of my boys, going super, super late. So that is going to wrap up that segment of our rundown. We've got a few Twitter questions that I just want to get to quickly. Somebody asked, who is the lowest ranked closer that Jenny feels confident drafting right now and rolling into the start of the season as her CL1? I think this was from Yancey Eaton, meaning they have...
How are we answering that guy's question?
He's everywhere.
Yeah, right? He's texted me.
He doesn't listen to.
He's texted me during the podcast, meaning they will have the job now and likely remain closer even after the wave of transactions that will happen once we finally get a CBA. So, Jenny, since it's directed at you, I'll let you start.
I'm pretty conservative, so I'm going to say there's only about 8 guys that I feel comfortable with. Obviously Hendricks Hader, Iglesias, Clase, Diaz, Presley. I feel comfortable with Will Smith and Aroldis Chapman. That's probably my list. I think Kenley Jansen is likely to close wherever he goes, but without knowing where that is, I'm not going to say that for sure. I mean, I don't think anybody thought that, Craig Kimbrell would end up on, the White Sox last year, but it happened. Just because somebody's got a closer doesn't mean that they won't bring one in. So he's a emergency option potentially, but I really only feel comfortable with 8 of them, which is why I will spend an early pick on a closer. I feel comfortable doing it. I don't mind, I'm all about it.
I actually have the exact same top 8. And I think you can kind of say Jansen, Romano, Melanson are all quasi. I think Melanson's safer than the other two, but because I don't think Arizona will bring anybody else in to challenge him. But I think Arizona could win like 40 games this year. So, Jason, who's your last closer one you're willing to take a gamble
on? So I'm a little more aggressive. And for me, my closer one that I would be like, okay, great, is Corey Knebel. He's going in the 10th round. Will Smith is my more realistic, like, hey, that's where I am. But I've also said a few times that I believe that Corey Knebel is this year's Rafael Iglesias, whereas last year Iglesias was kind of everybody's like, that's kind of where I lose my comfort. But he was same. The only difference is Knebel obviously has that higher injury history, but from a skills perspective, from the strikeouts, from the walks, from the home runs, from manager that likes to use relievers consistently, it's like he has all those things in common where Iglesias was sitting last year. And so I'm pretty certain my Knebel share is at 100%, because if he's there in the 10th round, I've grabbed him every single time. Even as a C2, I've taken, just because you have to have those saves. He hasn't been my C1, but he absolutely, if the conditions were right and everything was off the board, I'd wait and take him as a C1.
I'd be happy to have him as a C2 for sure.
Yeah, I think C2 I'm more comfortable. I don't think I could take him as a C1. And honestly, he's not a guy I'm really targeting as a C2 either. I'm afraid Philadelphia brings another arm in. And that's my, I'm afraid they trade for Kim.
Here's the thing, like in TGFB, as I'm doing the snake thing, if I want him, I'm going to have to take him at the top of the 9th. And here's a good example about where you pick. It's like, I don't want to take him at the top of the 9th. There's not a value there. If he were still there at the top of the 11th, I will. But the fact that I've taken him in the 10th round in every other league, I know he's not going to make it out of the 10th round. So I'm not going to have him in TGFBI unless he makes it to 11-1. So there's my line in the sand, listeners. If you don't take him in the 10th, I will take him 11-1. I don't care what I have on my roster. I'll take him 11-1.
All right. How does strategy change in a best ball draft versus standard roto? Jenny,
out of this, I don't play.
Yeah. Jason gets to be quiet for a sec, and Jenny gets to school us a little bit. So go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, this is a good chance for me to plug my Rotoballer article that's going to be coming out. I don't know exactly what day yet, since this is my first article. I don't know the process fully, but I've submitted it. It's there, so it should hopefully be out soon. I'm not going to maybe give away everything that's in there, so people will hopefully read it. But I think the biggest place to start is to really realize the differences in the scoring. So this is points, and points is a lot different than Roto. You don't need steals, you don't need saves, you don't need to worry about balancing categories. You just need to worry about the total points that somebody will score, and you need to make sure that you have covered all of your positions. So the thing that I do to start out is I just take a set of projections, my favorite set of projections, and export them into Excel, and then just calculate the total points projected for each guy. You can, mess with playing time a little bit, and that'll change things. But for the most part, I just calculate the points, and you're going to end up, it's going to look a lot different than what Roto's standings will look like. All of those steals guys will not be pushed up the way that they are in Roto. And, the closers, like I did a best ball auction last night, and I didn't get a closer of any kind, any relief pitcher at all in the first 23 rounds. You just don't need one. If the prices were right, you do it. If they're not, you don't need to worry about it. So, I think that just calculating the points will show you a lot about the differences in value. The other thing is you need to make sure that you get enough players qualified at each position. So when I don't know if it's NFBC that you're on or Fantrax, there's a big difference though. Fantrax has the player is only qualified at one position, at their primary position, and that changes a lot. So I have experience on NFBC where you get their normal NFBC eligibility, and I try to make sure that I have at least 4 guys at every infield position and something around 12 outfielders. Because what you want to have as much as you possibly can, as much depth as you can, because every week different guys are going to be scoring the most points. It's not always the best guy that scores the most points. So you can have, your third or fourth shortstop have a 3-steal week, or hit a couple home runs, and he's right there in your lineup, and you want to take advantage of that as much as possible. And one thing that I did put in that article was, hopefully it stays, is a comparison of just making one change in a lineup from single eligibility to somebody with dual eligibility, and how, if they have scored a certain amount of points, how that can just restructure your entire starting lineup. Your middle infielder might move to corner infield, and that might change the utility guy that's put in, and it can make a difference of 8, 10, 12 points every week. And if you add all that up, it can really make a big difference over the course of the season.
Absolutely. I don't have much to add actually to that. The only thing I am going to reinforce is I think it is really, really important to know your format, right? Know the points, whether you're playing on Fantrax or whether you're playing on NFBC or whatever other site might be doing best balls. Make sure you know your format, and I highly recommend using draft software because you can use ranks, but ranks are somewhat useless because this is the hard part about giving away or giving analysis for points leagues is everybody's point system's different. And it's the reason why I know the majority of people who play fantasy baseball play in points leagues, but the majority of the analysis is for Roto, and that's because Roto is a consistent format across all the platforms, whereas points leagues, best ball leagues are not consistent. So what I highly recommend is RotoLab, RotoWire, one of those draft softwares. If you don't want to pony up the money for those, I think they're well worth the money. But I understand if you've got one $50 league, you may not want to pay $40 for draft software. Then go over to the Fangraphs auction calculator, pick your projection system of choice, put all the point categories in and run it, and then kind of move guys up and down based on your preference. If I'm just going to say random players here, if Chris Bassett is you prefer Chris Bassett over Framber Valdez, but Valdez is a few spots higher in the ranks, you just move Bassett up, right? But I think it's really important to have the computer do the math for you to the best of your ability, and then you play with it from there.
The other thing that you can do, one really nice feature that NFBC has is it allows you to import custom rankings.
Mm-hmm.
So you can export their default rankings, rearrange them however you want, and then re-import them with your custom name and set your, it will set up your draft room to show your rankings rather than the default rankings, which are, I don't know if they're still set off of last year or they're set off of Roto. They're not super useful in a best ball league. So I like to import my custom rankings. So, especially in a slow draft and, worst case scenario, you get auto picked or something, it's going to take the best guy off of your list, or it's just, a lot easier to look at the draft room that way.
One of these days I've actually got to do that.
I did it.
Yeah.
I have like 4 different custom rankings imported this year, and it's been really nice.
Yeah, I'm going to do that before I head to Vegas. So that's going to happen probably this week at some point. So, last question is, what's the deal with Adam Engel? Power, speed, and the glove should keep him playing in elite lineup. ADP feels disproportionately high. So is it just a health thing, or sleeper or bust? Jason, I'm going to let you take this. But I think this is the problem with when you look at a stat line and you start projecting it to carry through to full plate appearances. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jay.
I mean, here's the weirdness of Adam, and this is it's where it is because Adam Engel is like lightning fast. He is
Very fast.
Yeah, he's Tyler Wade fast, but the problem is, he and Tyler Wade have about the same offensive potential. And I say this in all seriousness. It's weird with Engel because you may look at him and say like, oh, hey, he could be a short side platoon guy, but the weirdness of it all is he hits righties better than lefties, and it's not like a 1 year sample size thing. Like he legitimately hits righties better. But in that lineup, he's going to be hitting ninth as well, so he would be down in that lineup. The athleticism in a year where speed is precious, I get it, but there's a reason why he doesn't play every day. And we're not talking about a kid. We're talking about a guy who's 30 this year. He's had his opportunities on bad Chicago teams, and he has not, but 1 year, played a decent amount of time. And we saw what happened in that 1 year. Go back and look at 16. Very few walks, lots of strikeouts, low OBP, and got 16 steals because he was out there enough for a very bad team. White Sox will be very good this year. They should be. Adam Engel should not be in that lineup more often. Now, if he's somebody, let's say they make a deal and they trade him to Oakland and get something like in the right situation, Adam Engel could play a lot and repeat 2016 and potentially become a bargain where he's being taken. But on this roster, the way it's put together, he not much going to happen here. He's going to be strategically used as a day off, as a defensive replacement, as a pinch runner type of thing, as La Russa likes to do. But as a mostly everyday player, I don't see it.
What about you, Jenny? Do you see it?
Probably not. I mean, he seems to me like a perfect watch list guy. Let him go during draft season. Maybe a late draft champions kind of pick, but otherwise let him go. See how much he's playing, see what's happening. And probably for the majority of, the fantasy community, it'll be week 2, 3, and 4 where they'll say, well, look what Adam Engel's doing. But if you can get him in weeks, a week early at that point, maybe you'll stumble into something. But yeah, he also had shoulder surgery in the off season, and shoulder surgery makes me nervous for hitters.
I missed that news. Really?
So that's what I read this morning. Hopefully I'm right about that.
Wow, I missed that.
You did. Yeah.
So I don't love that part of it. So I'll keep an eye on him, but I'm not going to draft him.
His shoulder surgery, I believe, was a scope, so it's not like a full-on surgery.
Okay.
It's more just kind of clearing out loose bodies. My issue is he does not have power. Like this is he makes decent amount of contact, but he also swings and misses quite a bit. But yeah, I think people are looking at like the 7 home runs and I think 100 and 140 plate appearances, and they're like, ooh, if he can get to 500 plate appearances, this is a 20-20 or a 25-25 guy. He is not. I think he could steal 20 bases, and so I think he works out kind of perfectly for this discussion that we're having today. If he gets enough playing time, he could definitely steal 20-25 bases, but he's probably a single-digit home run guy. His defense is the only reason why he keeps getting opportunities at the age of 30. The problem is they've already got a crowded team, and there's talk that they could bring in other people, including there was a rumor, I think, yesterday that they're interested in Chris Bryant, who would clog up that outfield a little bit more too. So I think that it seems unlikely he's anything more than a reserve guy once the season gets going. If we start getting towards the season and all the other big free agents are gone and stuff, and the White Sox have made their trades, because remember they're still, I think, going to trade Kimbrel. What are they going to get back? Are they going to get an outfielder back? Are they going to get a second baseman back? And then Luis Garcia goes into the outfield. So I think there's a lot of ways he can lose his job. I'm more looking for guys who there's a lot of ways they can get a job or playing time, not a guy who I'm worried is going to lose it all the time. So that is going to do it for this episode. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was exciting. This is a podcast I've listened to for so many years, so it's a little bit surreal to be on it, but I'm happy to be asked.
Well, you were an absolute pleasure to have on. Can you remind everybody where you reach on social media, and then again plug your work?
Yeah, so on Twitter is the best place to reach me. I'm at Jenny Butler 830, and I've written for the FTN 5-Tool Fantasy Draft Guide, which is a great publication. There's a lot of other great stuff in it besides my own. But then this year, hopefully you will see me on both Rotoballer and Fantrax.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Let me know when that first article drops, and I'll throw it into the link into the show notes
Awesome. I will.
and retweet it out. Jason, what are you working on? Where can you be reached?
So working on an article about chasing wins. Now that we've talked about chasing steals, looking at wins. Last year, the last few years, I went on a bit of a tweet storm this morning talking about it. How starting pitchers have earned 18% fewer wins just over the last 4 years. So looking at conditions on wins, things like run support while the pitcher's in the game. Looking at relief, trying to find some stuff with wins. So a lot of data around that particular thing. So that article will be out sometime this week, probably Wednesday. Would be remiss if I forgot to congratulate Nick and Alex on winning the FSWA podcast, Fantasy Baseball Podcast of the Year. And then the 3 Hall of Famers that I know listen to this show, and Steve Gardner and Scott Pianowski and Dave Ganos. So particularly the latter two, because those are the first two of the first people I met in this industry when I started playing at a national level. Or Dave, because he's a Rays fan like me, and then Scott Pianowski was the person I sat next to. I was lucky enough to sit between Corey Schwartz and Scott Pianowski in my first Tout Wars draft, and 2 of the best people ever. So it's congrats to those guys on making the Hall of Fame, and pretty cool for them. That's
it. Let's see. You can reach me on Twitter at Justin Mason FWFB, writing daily over at Fangraphs on this podcast, the TGFBI podcast, and the Friends of Fantasy Benefits podcast. TGFBI starts tomorrow. It's going to be exciting. I can't wait. Hopefully, people don't yell at each other for taking too long to pick. But with
4 hours, baby, 1-1.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to come reach out to you and be like, "No, I've already got it auto set." I'm not that much of a prick. So.
There will be someone, though. There always is. So with that, for Jenny, Jason, and myself, thank you for listening. Have fantastic baseball.